subsequently covered two more standoffs, the Sugar Pine Mine standoff and the White Hope Mine standoff. It was at that time that I was offered a job as National Media Director and an Associate Editor for the webpage. So I spent a few years with the Oath Keepers, and I can tell you that they may not like to call themselves a militia, but they are. They're a violent militia, and they are largely Stuart Rhodes. And I think, rather than try to use words, I think the best illustration for what the Oath Keepers are happened January 6th, when we saw that stacked military formation going up the stairs of our Capitol.
And happy Friday, and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Friday, July 15th, 2022. We're here a day early, and I'll explain to you why that is, because we got so much stuff we need to cover. I am so fortunate to have the full panel in today. It's been a while since we had me along with three other folks, but I got three very, very, very important folks that you need to hear from this week. So let me just go ahead and bring them in. Of course, Val Atkinson is here. Hey, Val.
Hello, Ed. How are you?
And then, of course, everybody knows Joyner, our legal analyst and contributor. And then we have somebody new. We have Emmitt Riley from DePauw University. Dr. Emmitt Riley, a son of the Mississippi Delta, and now living in the Midwest in Indiana and at DePauw University. Dr. Riley, real quick, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Yes, thanks for having me on today. I'm Emmitt Riley. I'm an associate professor and director of Africana Studies at DePauw University. I also serve as the Whitcomb Endowed Faculty Fellow to 2025. I teach political science and African American studies, particularly race politics, legislative process, and the American political institutions for the department. I currently serve as the president-elect of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, and recently published my first book, Racial Attitudes in America Today, which is co-authored with Clarissa Peterson, where we investigate the potency of racial attitudes within the American political system and how it has spilled over into the political considerations of racial and ethnic minorities in the U.S.
Well, that's a mouthful, but we're going to get to that because the reason why I wanted you on is, and Val and Irv, you saw this too in the intro coming in today. One of the Oath Keepers spoke at the 1-6 committee hearing, and he outright said that the Oath Keepers are a racist paramilitary group, a militia, and they're up to no good. And in today's current politics, we are deeply divided, and these white supremacist groups, Val, have made a lot of headway in getting a sort of white voters who are sort of on the fringe, who don't, I'm not going to make any excuses for them, but may not know deeply what those Oath Keepers are all about, but they have a sensitivity to them, right? They may not be full bore into white replacement theory, but they will echo some of those themes. So tell me real quick, Val, what you thought about the testimony from Mr. Van Teeter from the Oath Keepers first, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper.
He reminded me, Ed, of something that we talk about on this show quite frequently, and that is that there's a segment of society that really needs convincing.
My free time.
Or so.
Other than that, with my family, camping, playing basketball, playing games with my son.
Just what any ordinary American citizen, family man would do.
Yep, exactly. For me personally, I was, pretty hardcore into the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I followed, President Trump, on all of the websites,
Many white folks are unaware of what's going on and how they are being led. I think one of the reasons that Donald Trump chose the party affiliation that he did, he was looking for easy bait. He was looking for low-hanging fruit. He wanted followers that wouldn't do a lot of questioning and those kinds of things. So that's how he found that. But you know, my primary response is what it always has been, Ed, and I want to put it in form of a question here. You know, I want to talk about my contention of all of this because it's the same about the narratives surrounding race and politics in America. And I contend that in some cases, Democrats are the ones that's misfocused. You know, they talk about surface issues like police brutality, equality, inclusion, things of that nature, but don't get strongly focused on the root cause of white America's discontent. The root cause of white America's discontent is a deeply embedded fear that they will lose their culture, which they think is absolutely assured if Democrats and their legion of coloreds outvote them at the poll. Hey, this is the root of it. This is why they do what they do. And people like Donald Trump, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the 3%ers, they tug on that piece. And they know if they can connect with that, they can take the American public anywhere they want to lead them. Now, I want to go to Dr. Riley, if I might, and talk about some of the issues that are talked about in your class. You're the one dealing with youth. And how are they responding to race and politics in America these days? And what are they saying in response to the proponents of craziness that some of our right wingers are putting down?
Thank you for that question. I tend to agree that part of white America's discontent is Black advancement. This is something that I talk about in my classes on a daily basis. We use Ron Walter's book, White Nationalism, Black Interest, where he talks in particular about the American political system is based off of what he calls the equilibrium, and that the equilibrium has always been white governance structures that have governed society. And so anytime there's a disruption to this equilibrium, it is followed by a period of extreme, what he calls extreme radical conservatism. We saw this after Reconstruction. We saw this after the 1960s. We saw this also after the election of Barack Obama. And so I'm not inclined to say that white folk are so unaware of replacement theory. I think that when we look primarily at Black advancement, they may not know what it is theoretically, but it is part of an ideology that has infiltrated white politics and liberal politics as well, is the idea that as Black people advance, as we get degrees, as we move into communities, as we go up in society, as we have the first Black Supreme Court justice, the first Black vice president, the first Black president of the United States, no matter how dismal the progress that we made under those achievements, in the minds of white Americans, as Black people vote, as the country becomes more brown, it represents a fundamental threat to the old American way. And so January 6th simply became a symptom of what the Republican Party and the US politics has been doing since forever, right? In terms of how we've organized and talked about race and engaged in this race baiting. And so we're at a very interesting moment in American political history, because I fear that it is too late for saving this republic. If we think about the Supreme Court rolling back Roe versus Wade, they've now agreed to take up a case where we essentially place elections in the hands of states. There's no doubt in my mind that the Supreme Court is going to come down in this case in a 5-3 decision, which is going to gut essentially what's left of the Voting Rights Act as a result of Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court case, which essentially gutted sections of the Voting Rights Act. In terms of how students are responding, I work at a small white liberal arts college, and these students are a representation of society at large. There are those who are open to conversations, but there are those who also resist having open and honest conversations about race in American politics. I think that we can't talk about what January 6th represented enough, in the sense that an angry mob of white vigilantes who knew that the election had not been stolen, who knew that, that Donald Trump had lost, attempted to disrupt a peaceful transition of power in what is supposed to be a model of democracy for the world. And I think the US has lost its position and is more a high ground to talk about human rights, to talk about equality, to talk about all of these human rights issues that we proclaimed or profess that we represent to the world. We've lost the moral authority on those conversations. And so as we think about January 6th, there's a number one word, white supremacy. And I think as we talk about white supremacy, we have to define what it is, because it's not just the Oath Keepers. It's not just the Proud Boys. It is Mitch McConnell. It is members of Congress who have stood in the way of Black advancement, both in action, deed, and opposition to policies that are designed to eradicate some of this system of white supremacy. And we cannot stress enough that it's low-hanging fruit to know that those people who attacked the Capitol were white supremacists. What we've got to challenge society to talk about is what are the subtle ways in which white supremacy operates as a political apparatus into mainstream politics, both in liberal ideology and conservative ideology, that serves as an impetus for Black advancement. And I think that these are just some of the things that I've been thinking about as we navigate this very, very scary political moment, because for me, what does the system look like 10, 20 years from now? How many rights will we roll back? We're banning books. We're banning teaching a free exchange of ideas. How far are we going to go is the question that, I think that concerns me as an academic and as a political scientist.
Well, I think it probably also concerns you. You sound like a Baptist preacher. You were on the roll there, and it gives me an opportunity to bring Herb Joyner in here. Herb Joyner, you teach law, and Dr. Riley was spot on talking about this rollback of rights. In your assessment of this thing, we can't look at the 1/6 as just a one-off at an event where Donald Trump is trying to get back into office. Donald Trump was able to stack the court to allow what Dr. Riley was just talking about. What are our options now that the court is stacked? And what kind of hope do we have that we can beat back some of this rollback of rights?
Well, thank you for that. I certainly was intrigued by the conversation that I've heard. And I think that the key to it is white supremacy. The white replacement theory is just a more sophisticated way of rationalizing white supremacy. But I think a lot of it is more so white resentment of African Americans in this country. White superiority is nothing new to the law. This country, as is envisioned in the Dred Scott decision, the U.S. Supreme Court, the same one that we're talking about right now, said very clearly that this was a country that was made by whites, for whites, on behalf of whites, and it was never intended that Africans or their descendants would ever be citizens of this country. And of course, after the Civil War, that changed somewhat with the introduction of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But the law basically undergirded this notion of white superiority. When you talk about originalism, that is all that you are dealing with, is white superiority. And you can tie it up in a whole lot of other little philosophical bundles that you want to, but it all rolls back to the same thing. And it's important to remember that African Americans or Africans didn't choose to come here. The only reason that most of us are here is because they brought us here. We were stolen away, and now they're mad at themselves for stealing us away. We have not caused the browning. I mean, let's be clear. African Americans have not caused the browning of America. The browning of America is caused by others, yet we are the ones that's targeted as the cause for this resentment. And it is codified in the law all over the place. And as you then add judges who are of that persuasion and now who are emboldened to ignore the constraints of the Constitution, which they wrote and which they enacted into the legal system. They have the power to ignore it at will, and they do. Now you have the U.S. Supreme Court that has now been captured by this predominant point of view, and we're going to watch a slow erosion of all of these constitutional protections that the law is supposed to provide. We have to push back, and we have to challenge it in court, but we have to challenge it at the ballot box, because we have to change the people who are in power. And if we can't change the people who are in power, then we are going to be doomed by the enactments and the statutes and the philosophy that guide their actions and interactions with us.
Yeah, I want to remind the listeners you're listening to The Deal. That's Herb Joyner, you just heard, professor of law at North Carolina Central University. And we're fortunate today to have Emmitt Riley, Dr. Emmitt Riley III from DePauw University in Indiana with us. And of course, Val Atkinson, our political analysis as always. Guys, before we run out of time in this segment, I did want to talk about one other thing. And Dr. Riley, I'll let you take the first stab at this. One of the things that is clear is during the George Floyd protest, the right had a whole different attitude about protests. They wanted to shoot people. They're like, just shoot them in the kneecap. They wanted to fly helicopters low over people. The president walked out in front of the protest and held the Bible upside down at the church and had the military by his side, whatever, yada, yada, yada. Again, in your analysis of how we deal with race in America, when those George Floyd protests was going on and all the other dead Black people, we talked about murder porn of Black men last week on the program, how it's just become this constant, here's another video, and there's a protest. How white people view those protests juxtaposed against the 1-6, because I keep hearing people say that they were just tourists and they were just kind of ambling through and they weren't really bad people.
Yeah, so what we know from the academic scholarship is that the way in which we view white protests versus Black protests or racialized movements is going to always be covered inherently different. There is no doubt in my mind, as I sat in this very seat on January 6th and witnessed white people crawling up the Capitol like roaches, it was a profound degree of privilege in terms of their capacity to breach what is supposed to be the temple of democracy. And yet, when Blacks have gone to protest for George Floyd, we've seen military style equipment and defense brought out to stop people from protesting freely. And if we recall, when George Floyd was first murdered, white people claimed to have had a racial epiphany. There was a shift in public opinion about police. There was this idea that for the first time, white Americans may be on board with significant police reform. And my co-author and I published an article in the National Review of Black Politics where we warned people that this shift in public opinion is not sustainable, primarily because whites' reaction to racialized movements is typically conditioned when we see the term Black. And so what we see now is people are no longer supportive of Black Lives Matter in terms of public opinion. We see that attitudes towards policing has actually improved in this nation. And what we see happening is whenever there is an attempt for Black people to get out and to protest for their political rights, it is oftentimes viewed as negative. Oh, they need to protest in a civilized way. Yet the credibility of such conversation now is lost. We've had multiple attempts where we've seen the way in which white protesters and white terrorists are treated versus the way Black people are treated. Example, Dylann Roof walked into the Mother Emanuel Church and executed Black people and was able to walk out. The young man, white supremacist in May, walked into the grocery store, executed Black people, and walked out. Even now in my home state, the arrest warrant for Callum Bryan has been found in the LaFleur County Courthouse, and the Black district attorney is refusing to coordinate with the local sheriff to enforce the warrant. And so this speaks to the larger point, is the way in which I really appreciate going back to this idea that the Black man, from the Supreme Court case, the Black man has no rights by which the white man is bound to respect by law, because that opinion consistently shows up in both the way laws are written, the way laws are enforced, and we see this double standard all the time in our political system. And one of the things that concerns me is that as we think about this conservative judiciary and the way they're interpreting free speech, Arizona just passed a law relegating that, saying something to the degree that you have to be so many feet away in order to record police officers in doing wrongdoing. And so these, how with this conservative court, how is our understanding of free speech going to change? How is our understanding of protest is going to change when we begin to think about some of the principles that we've talked about as being core to American democracy, right, that are now under threat? And so I think that definitely there isn't but one way to call this is a spade, and that is this nation has a deep sin and hate for Black people whenever we are protesting for rights.
Yeah, well, Val, y'all Negroes are dangerous, and we see that all the time about how we treat it. We can't even have a broken taillight because we end up dead. You know what? We're running out of time in this segment. Dr. Riley, can you stay a little bit for the next segment?
I can stay.
So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're gonna continue this discussion. On the way out, because Dr. Riley, you don't know this, but if we say Donald Trump's name on here, we have to play a clip of Donald Trump. So on the way out, we're going to play a clip of Donald Trump talking about when the looting starts, the shooting starts, and him trying to explain how that's not talking about killing Negroes. We'll be right back after this message.
And support the rights for peaceful protesters. We can't allow a situation like happened in Minneapolis to descend further into lawless anarchy and chaos. Well, I've heard that phrase for a long time. I don't know where it came from, where it originated. I view that phrase as...
In 1967, the Miami police
Well, I don't know.
chief
I've also
used it.
heard from many other places, but I've heard it for a long time, as most people have. And frankly, it means when there's looting, people get shot and they die. And if you look at what happened last night and the night before, you see that. It's very common. And that's the way that was meant, and that's the way I think it was supposed to be meant. But I don't know where it came from. I don't know where it originated. I wouldn't know a thing like that. But I will say it's very accurate in the sense that when you do have looting, like you had last night, people often get shot and they die, and that's not good, and we don't want that to happen. Yeah, please.
Healthcare is about being seen and heard.
Healthcare is letting me be unapologetically me.
Healthcare is contraception.
En Planned Parenthood, primero es la salud.
Healthcare is knowing I have an STI and learning how to tell my partner.
Healthcare is HIV testing.
They took care of everything I needed. It was fantastic.
It's not going to the doctor for women's care or for men's care. It's going to the doctor for me.
El cuidado de salud es positivo por ser positivo.
It's about becoming a mom when I was ready.
Healthcare is my Pap test, my breast exam, my cancer screening.
Healthcare is access to safe and legal abortion.
Healthcare is trans care.
Mi salud es Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood is healthcare.
This is healthcare.
We got derogatory information from OSINT suggesting that some very, very violent individuals were organizing to come to DC. And not only were they organizing to come to DC, but they were these groups, these non-aligned groups were aligning. And so all the red flags went up at that point. You know, when you have our militia, collaborating with white supremacy groups, collaborating with conspiracy theory groups online, all toward the common goal, you start seeing what we call in terrorism a blended ideology, and that's a very, very bad sign.
Trump repeated his big lie and claimed it was, quote, statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election. before calling for a big protest in DC on January 6th, be there, will be wild. Is the 6th D-Day? Is that why Trump wants everyone there? Another asserted, Trump just told us all to come armed. Fucking A, this is happening. A third took it even further. It will be wild means we need volunteers for the firing squad.
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That is Val Atkinson, our resident political analysis person. Herb Joyner, legal eagle from North Carolina Central University. And Dr. Emmitt Riley, who's here for the first time with us, and we're so happy he's here. He's added some liveliness to the discussion from DePauw University. Fellas, and I'll start with you, Irv. You saw the clip coming back in, and clearly the DC Department of Homeland Security knew in advance that these people were planning acts. And people were talking about even killing people, and they had that information beforehand. Why? And I don't know. Why cannot there be some legal remedy for this? Who gets arrested in this case when clearly people were saying that they plan on killing people? Isn't that communicating threats or something? I don't know. What do you do in DC? When somebody's coming onto federal property, how do you handle that legally? Because it seems to be there's ample evidence that these people plan to be up to no good.
You know, clearly there is ample evidence for the public to reach that conclusion. The problem is that with the structure of the law, there is probably not enough evidence to bring about some convictions for some people. Obviously, there have been convictions. And again, I go back to this notion of who it is that is in power and what is it that they are inclined to do. Clearly, at the outset, there were acts of omission because, as you indicated, they knew that these people were coming and did not prepare for them. And it would seem that somewhere in that process, there was a clog of the communication flow. Because there was clearly not a clog in the investigative flow because they had the information about these groups coming in, that they were armed. They knew what type of weapons they had. They knew who had the weapons. They knew where they were going to be. But after that, there was no follow through, which suggests to me that there was a suppression of that information going to law enforcement officers who were basically set up to get what they got on January the 6th. And a part of the problem is going to be identifying those people who clogged up that information flow and that preparation flow to allow the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the 3%ers, and the white Christian nationalists to come together to engage in the kind of violent behavior that they were engaged in. Now, it was clear that there was a large segment of those people who came to Washington with the clear intent on havoc. They were there to destroy. They were there to interfere with what was going on. And I think that the January 6th committee has done a good job in identifying just what the intent was for people coming in. The short part of all of that is being able to identify the specific individuals who, passed the word on or made the decisions that this is what was going to happen because all of the actors did what they were supposed to do. Now it is a matter of unearthing who it was, what they said to whom, and when, and being able to present that in court. But for most of us, we know what happened. But when you get into a court of law where you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the criminal activities of individuals, then you are running into problems with the people at the top of the chain not with respect to the people who are at the middle and bottom of that chain.
Well, Val, see, these lawyer types like Irv Joyner always letting criminals off and talking about all this legal stuff. Let's talk about the political price to be paid, if there's any. Now, the hearings have been dramatic. There's been a lot of information given out or whatever. What is your assessment politically? Have the Republicans even have an inkling that they have to pay any price for all the shenanigans that are going on? Are they going to be able to walk away scot-free on this?
Well, you and I and a lot of other people hope not on this. But, it goes back to the question about the purpose, the singular purpose of the 1-6 committee in the first place. Whether or not their goal or their aim is to ferret enough information up to change public opinion so we can win bigger battles at the polls, or whether or not it is to give information to Merrick Garland so that charges can be actually brought against some of these folks. And I've said on this show and other shows several times before, that's important for Benny Thomas, Dr. Riley's homeboy. It's very, very important for him to be clear about the purpose and the intent of that committee. And we have to see that going forward. Of course, I think that I agree 100% with Irv Joyner, that, a lot of people in the public, we are novice. We don't understand the legal implications of a lot of things that are being talked about. And because it sounds horrible and it sounds bad, it doesn't mean that it's prosecutable in courts. So we need to be very careful about what star we hook our wagons to, about all of this kind of things going forward. One of the things, and I'll say this and move, that I'm concerned about is that we have put all of our eggs in the basket of voter turnout, that too many of us are thinking that if we can beat the drums loud enough, if we can just keep pressuring and letting people know how horrible this is, more people are going to get upset, angry, whatever, and they're going to rush to the poll to pull the Democratic lever and those kind of things. I don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's that simple because I know that Republicans have been working on voter suppression a long time before 1-6. They have been working on things like gerrymandering a long time before 1-6. They've been working on things like Citizens United to make sure they got all the money they need. As the good doctor was talking about Shelby v. Holden, to make sure you don't have to have pre-clearance anymore. They've been doing this stuff all along.
Yeah.
So if all of your eggs are in the basket of, we're going to have voter turnout, you need to have a plan B and maybe even a plan C. I think there ain't nothing wrong with plan A. Ain't nothing wrong with plan A. I want us to have 100% voter turnout. I'd love to see that. But my question is, if you don't get 100%, what's your plan B?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Riley.
Understanding what they are doing with voter suppression and gerrymandering and the like.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Riley, we often talk about, and I know I've been talking about for the 27, 28 years I've been on in the media, that we're really good at that message that Val is talking about, delivering that, you need to come out to vote. You need to whatever, right? We say it all the time. However, especially when we talk about what will help Black folks, doesn't really translate to white people. They don't care what happens to us necessarily. You're in a state like Indiana, and I've been all throughout the Midwest, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, where there's no Black folks. So you can't lead with, oh, this is going to help Black folks, because that will make white people say, I don't care about them anyway. What if you're in a place where you could take all the Black people and turn every single one of them out, and you still have the Republicans and all the shenanigans that they've done by gerrymandering to make sure that Republicans can take over Wisconsin and places like that. Politically, how do you deal with that? Is Val right that these white people are never going to be sensitive to our issues and they're not going to come over to our side? You're not going to be able to get them to vote Democrat. They're always going to vote white supremacy first. I don't know. I mean, I'm asking you. You're the smart guy. You look at these kind of issues. What are these white folks thinking in North Dakota and Indiana and Iowa when they go to the polls?
If we're depending on them to get us to the promised land, we won't get there. I hate to say that, but the reality is we're in a very interesting period because on the one hand, Democrats promise folks so much and people turn out to vote. And they've been unable to deliver on many of their signature campaign promises. And so how do you in good faith turn around and tell people turn out to vote that is going to be the answer? Now, in principle, we know that we have to vote, that we have to remain engaged because the consequences of not being engaged is far worse than walking away, but it's very difficult to do so when you're paying $6 for gas. The president is reluctant to come out and forgive student loans. The president has placed the vice president in a very compromising position by putting her over voting rights when he wasn't even endorsed nixing the filibuster, which was a requirement to even get that done. And so now I think that there won't be any political consequences for Republicans for how bad January 6th was. The most Americans know what January 6th was. And I think that having to tell this story is important for the country, but that is not what's going to make people get out to vote, especially considering the fact that you're now voting in a post-Shelby County political environment. You're now voting in an environment where Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And if we're waiting on, if they think that women are going to be so upset that they're going to turn out en masse to vote on that issue, I think that that's a losing issue. And it's always been a losing issue for Democrats, primarily as a moral issue in terms of how they've allowed Republicans to frame it. But I also think that we cannot discount the mobilizing effect of white supremacy among white Americans. 74 million people voted to re-elect Donald Trump. It's no surprise that the Proud Boys are white supremacists. The man told them from the presidential debate stage, stand by and stand down. On the eve of the Republican primary, he refused to disavow David Duke. This was a signal, this was a cue to Southern white racists to come out. And so time and time again, we see these cues coming out and people are so surprised. I think that what we need a national shutdown of this government to press political leaders to act. We need people engaged beyond voting. We have to, we need a national strategy. And unfortunately, it looks like Democrats did not understand the assignment of the time that they're put into political power. Because as we think about the erosions of democratic norms, the erosions of our institutions, how the system failed to hold the president accountable, it was a time for Democrats to come in with major reforms to political institutions to protect and secure the sacred act of voting. And these are things that we failed to do. So I think that now, I don't want to give people a doom and gloom story, but this is going to require massive political participation and engagement beyond voting, but vote is also important. I also think that one of the things coming out of this area is Black women in politics are now engaging at a higher level. We see more women running and winning and contesting political offices, and that may be the shining light in this sort of glim story that we're in. But I also think that the more we're talking about racial issues, that's a winning issue for Republicans always, especially if it's not going to be offset by extreme turnout in Black communities and in communities of color across the U.S.
Yeah. All those points are well taken. You know what? We're going to take one last break and then we're going to come back. I need to cover two other topics, and I want you to stay, Dr. Riley, if you can. We were talking about Joe Biden in whether or not he is going to be a viable candidate for the Democrats for the presidential election because his poll numbers are horrible. So on the way out, you're going to see a clip about Joe Biden being in the Middle East. And when we come back, we're going to wrap this thing up and we're going to talk about the viability of Joe Biden as a candidate for the Democrats and who may emerge on the Republican side when and if Donald Trump announces that he's going to run. Stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
What's on the agenda as Joe Biden and Israel's leaders meet this Thursday morning?
The strategic partnership is on the agenda, and I'd say front and center Iran. The threat from Iran, the now less successful Iran nuclear deal talks that the US still remains committed to, would hope to revive, and Israel has opposed, at least in this format. You know, different Israeli politicians have different views. But I think that is also part of the glue that holds the new union, the normalization deals, the Abraham Accords between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Morocco. It is also that looking out to the threat from Iran. So
sit down, you'll hear what I have to say. If you think you...
I've been trying to tell you this for years.
Let me finish my comment. Let him talk. Let him talk. No one, okay? Because make no mistake about it, this legislation is real progress, but more has to be done. The provision of this new legislation is going to save lives, and it's proof that today's politics, we can come together on a bipartisan basis to get important things done.
As an Olympic athlete, I prepare for everything. So when I became pregnant, I thought I was ready. But at 32 weeks, I was diagnosed with severe preeclampsia and had an emergency C-section. Looking back, had I known the warning signs, I would have talked to my doctor sooner. Too many women die of pregnancy-related complications, and most are preventable. If you or someone you know is pregnant or recently had a baby, learn the warning signs. It could help save her life. Hear her.
Welcome back to our third and final segment of The Deal. I'm Ed Clark. You're listening to The Deal on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may get that. You can also get us the video if you want to see Val's lovely face. You can watch the video on Facebook, on YouTube, and all those other places. Remember to share the link with folks and get them to join and subscribe. We try to build this audience, and that's why we went to Indiana. And we found Dr. Emmitt Riley from DePauw University to join us today in our little, a seminar every Saturday and Fridays when we're on. And then sometimes you catch us on Sundays. And Herb is on the radio too, on the Legal Eagle Review out at North Carolina Central University. Val's on Connections. And then you'll find me here on either Friday or Saturday on The Deal. So fellas, when we left, we were trying not to be doom and gloom, Irv, but there's a political reality, but there's also a legal reality because we talked about those court cases that make it difficult to vote. And then we already talked about the court being stacked against, voting rights and those kind of things. Where are we now as we get ready to go into this midterm election? Which states are going to be the ones that are going to be the trickiest to negotiate legally concerning voting? Who's still mucking around the edges? I know in North Carolina we still got issues here, but what do you think the outcome is going to be legally in terms of election law?
The right to vote is going to become narrower. The laws are designed now, and those that are being proposed are to make it more difficult for people to vote after there has been this period where there was a loosening of the opportunities for people to vote. And you have to remember that at one point, there was only one day out of the year or during the election season that you could vote. But it beginning around 1995 up through 2005, there was an effort to loosen up opportunities for people to register and vote, and that was successful. And now we have to fight for it. And we have to fight for it with our people to help them to understand that we are in the zone of danger, that no matter what it is that happens across the board, if we don't act like we are the targets, then we are going to be the targets. And that becomes a kind of simple thing, because still there are a large percentage of African Americans who do not vote. We don't make alliances with other people of color who are also under the whip, and we aren't making proper alliances with whites that would be supportive of our efforts in the political arena. And so we have to gear up on that side if we are going to be able to compete in the political process. Now, if we don't want to participate in the political process, then we need to get involved in what it is. But the political process is the thing that we need to make sure that our people understand that if you're not engaged in it, then it is going to engage you in a very negative way. And the laws are now tightening up. And what we have to do is to drag our people out of their houses, out of the clubs, out of the bars, out of the beauty salons and the barbershops, and take them down to the polls and make them vote if they are not otherwise inclined to do so. Because if we don't save us, then nobody else will. And then with the proper alliances that we make, then we will be in a position to prevail. But then we can't shoot ourselves in the foot by arguing with each other and fighting with each other, as the Democrats seem to be doing right now. We have to have some major focus that is going to guide us through this political process in which we are engaged.
Well, Val, I'm looking out of the window right here. You know where we are. The studio's on the 15th floor of the Bank of America building here in Midtown Raleigh. And I'm looking at this construction going on. There's a $340 million complex that's going on across the street. Gas down here on the corner at this station always is high, but right now it's still hovering around $4.30 for gas right here on the corner. The consumer price index came out, said that inflation was at 9.1% or whatever for last month. The Democrats have some problems. It's hard to run against those kind of numbers. The apartment rents here, there's a building that just opened, a loft apartment, $1,900, and the most expensive apartment in the building is $17,000, Val, in Midtown Raleigh. Talk to me about how that's going to play into people's willingness to go vote. To me, that should make me want to go, but it may work the opposite, because a lot of what I've been hearing, especially from young people, is what's the point? So what is the point, Val?
The point is simple, that the administration has to do more and talk less, has to do more. For an example, I heard this morning that we're looking at a double-digit increase because of the CPI going up. Double-digit increase for people like me who are drawing Social Security. That's something that the administration needs to be talking about, because people drawing Social Security have the highest voter turnout than any other cohort that's listed in voter rights that's ever been listed, talking about the voting machine. Talk about those things that are going on that you are proud of, as opposed to getting sucked in, gaslighted by the media to only talk about bread and gas. You've got to take control of the conversation, of the narrative here. And let's talk about, this is what we're doing. As a matter of fact, we're doing more of that, and this is what you can look forward to. Now let's move on to something else and go on. Democrats have really got to be tough and take control of the narrative here, or they're going to allow the media and the GOP to take control of them.
Yeah, Dr. Riley, this is the last big question of the day. The Republicans are very adept at making people scared. Their phraseology is really good. This week in their weekly Senate news conference, they equated the inflation numbers to a tax on people, because they love to throw that out. And so now, if you look at right-wing media in the last 48 hours, they have been repeating that over and over again, that Joe Biden has raised your taxes in a surreptitious way because all the prices are up for bread and milk and those things that Val was talking about. Why are the Democrats not good or as good as the Republicans at ginning up anger with their base? Why do we want to compromise all the time from at least the centrist Democrats, maybe towards liberal? Obviously, progressive Democrats aren't so willing. Some of us are willing to fight, but why are those centrist Democrats terrible at delivering the message?
I think one reason why they're terrible at delivering the message is, I think when Democrats attempted to campaign to retake the Senate and the presidency, they overpromised. They misunderstood that white supremacy was the organizing force, and they assumed that once they achieved a majority, that members of their own caucus were going to be on board. I knew Joe Manchin was not going to be on board with many of these progressive policies, period, because of the state he comes from. Also, Kirsten Sinema as well, not being on board. And I think that, unfortunately, the country isn't as progressive as we believe it to be. And so Democrats are now locked into this position where you have descriptively a majority, but you can't deliver on any of these policies. But what I do see is Joe Biden has not taken leadership to show the Democratic base that he's fighting. He's not talking about these high rent prices. He's not talking about what is he doing to combat. Now, there's very little that the president can do to do some of these things, but oftentimes rhetoric matters in political campaigns. And so I think that these high inflation, as an associate tenured professor, I'm feeling inflation. So I can only imagine what other people are feeling. And I think that Democrats are going to, barring a miracle, Democrats are going to get voted out of office in large numbers. I think that the silver lining will be, for me, I'm more interested in what happens to the Senate seat in Georgia, what happens to the gubernatorial race in Georgia, and a few other state races that I think are likely to be interesting to see the political dynamics. But make no mistake about it, Republicans if they take back a majority, they are going to institute their agenda. They're going to pass legislation barring abortions nationally. They're going to institute some of the strictest voting rights reforms that they've had. And I think that Democrats, all this dragging their feet on court issues, the most important thing I saw as a priority that should have been a priority for this administration was securing voting rights. Because in the absence of securing voting rights, you become a political party that is impotent. And when that failed, I was like, oh God, we are in trouble. Because states made some of the worst moves in Texas and in Georgia and in Florida to restrict voting rights. And it becomes very difficult to talk to this younger generation about turn out to vote, turn out to vote, turn out to vote, when they turned out and they got nothing essentially. And so I think that we got to be creative in persuading people to remain engaged. I think that I delivered a talk at Talladega College where I talked about, at no point in our history did our ancestors give up, even when they faced worse circumstances than we faced. And that got to be the message, that we've got to remain vigilant. We've got to take people by the hand and convince them to vote and organize from a street community level, and not all the time wait for it to trickle down from the federal level. Right now, there's a lawsuit in Louisiana where the people of Louisiana are pressing the government, the courts, to give them 2 Black congressional districts. And it's going to be interesting to see. I worked as a redistricting fellow for the state of Louisiana, and the numbers are there. They're entitled to 2 Black congressional districts based off of the way the numbers are distributed. But there is a force that is working against that. And so now it's in the hand of the courts. And I'm afraid that the courts are not going to allow these 2 districts. And I think that we're talking about this in the abstract, but what happens when young Black people are consistently being shot by law enforcement officers? What happens when white vigilantes take over our temples of democracy and people no longer see the system as legitimate? These are the makings of a civil war, and I'm not sure if it's going to come next year, 10 years from now, but people are not going to consistently participate in political processes that they don't see as legitimate. And I think that all of these things are working up a storm to place this country on the eve of a civil conflict that may manifest itself differently from a traditional civil war, but nonetheless, it speaks to the fragility of the American political experience. I can't even call it a democracy anymore. You know.
Well, Dr. Riley, I have said for the last 20-some years I've been in the media that we live in a fascist state. I don't care what anybody says. We are not a democracy here. That gives me one other opportunity to talk to you, Herb Joyner, real quick. Dr. Riley talks about the case in Louisiana, and it's like that in a lot of places. In North Carolina, you know, just based on the numbers. In Louisiana, based on the numbers. In Mississippi, based on the numbers. In Alabama, based on the numbers. There should be more colored people in the House, but it ain't. And again, you know, working through some of the cases that you've been involved in, is there any opportunity anywhere in Louisiana for that to work out in Black people's favor?
Well, it depends on the local judge that is going to hear that case. That is a very important case, and clearly there is an effort to restrict the ability to add one African American to that delegation, as it is in North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi, and other states as well. The numbers would support it, but the politics won't. And if the politics don't, then it is our responsibility, I think, to begin to take control at the local level, because at the local level, the state legislature is where these decisions are made on the front end, where you can support them if you can win. It is more difficult when the legislature is against you at that local level, because then you have to overcome legally the inertia that is present. So it is a battle. Shelby versus Holder hurt us, and we have to try to overcome it, but it is our reality, and we have to fight back.
Yeah, well, Val, Dr. Nicole McFarland, our other cohort on here, she's back in Jamaica. She texted me the other day. She found an apartment for $400 a month. I think I may be moving to Jamaica. I don't know about you. Anyway, before we get out of here, Dr. Riley, do you have anything else you want to add? Anything you want to tell us, and we can wrap this up for you?
Yeah, I want to ask a question to the law professor. And this is about the discovery of this warrant from 1955 in Mississippi. When I wrote an op-ed calling on the district attorney to work with local law enforcement officers to serve the warrant. And I got a lot of pushback on social media suggesting, oh, prosecutors don't serve warrants. And I know that prosecutors do not personally execute warrants, but like investigations, the prosecutor usually works with the investigator to get a warrant served on a person that a judge has issued. What are your thoughts on whether or not this newly discovered warrant could be served, and your thoughts on that?
Well, the first question is whether the warrant is valid, and that is a matter of Mississippi law. And whether it is valid and whether it is in the police information network. Because if it is in the police information network as an outstanding warrant, then any law enforcement officer in the country can arrest Bryant and bring her into jail. Now, she is here in North Carolina.
In Raleigh, right here in Raleigh. Her apartment is about a mile up the road.
So what we need is some determination of the validity of that warrant. Typically, a warrant once issued lives forever because there is no statute of limitation on criminal action. And once that warrant is out there, the question now is whether North Carolina law enforcement officials, and not the prosecutor, but law enforcement officials will see that warrant will get that, and then they are under an obligation to serve it on that person and arrest them.
Yeah.
Because the warrant was discovered in a box in the basement of the courthouse. There was an article in the paper where the sheriff at the time indicated that he was not going to worry this white woman because she had 2 small children at home. And the local clerk certified the warrant and essentially placed the seal on it. And it was also oversaw by the Attorney General's office, who's also authenticated it as true. And right now, there is no statement whatsoever coming out of Dwayne Richardson's office. I'm actually from Lafleur County, the home county where the warrant was discovered. And so we've been attempting to go through that process of putting pressure on the DA to coordinate with law enforcement agencies or whatever they need to do to see if they can get the warrant served, to no avail to this date.
And there's an effort in North Carolina to push law enforcement to enforce that warrant if that warrant is in the system, allowing them to have the authority to make the arrest.
Okay.
Well, there you go. I mean, who knew, right? That you'd be here with Irv Joyner, who actually knows something about that. And literally the other day, Dr. Riley, the people showed up at a residence that they believe Ms. Bryant is where she's staying, and there's been protests here in Raleigh. And it's a small world. I guess I'll just say it that way.
And she's a relative of the former governor, Phil Bryant.
Yeah.
That's the other element that's unreported too.
Mm-hmm. And that helps you out, right? Who you know. So everybody knows the rules except for you, Dr. Riley. So I'm gonna leave it for last. So the rule is you got to tell me something you're working on or something we need to look forward to in the coming week. So we'll start with you, Irv Joyner. What do we got to look forward to? Anything you're working on we need to know before we wrap it up?
Training. I'm working with several groups now to help them to prepare for the upcoming election, to do organizing, to do training, to conduct educational efforts in local communities to get people prepared to fight the onslaught of people that will be at the polls that will try to prevent them from voting. So my job is over the next few months is to work on training and helping people to know what it is that they need to do, that they can educate people to resist that effort.
Yeah, that's a good task to be working on. Val Atkinson, your turn. What are you working on? What do we need to know? Anything you got to tell us?
I am working on, and I'm just about finished, the second edition of my second book, Distractions. And that should be coming out real soon. And everybody keep their ear to the ground. We're going to be pushing it forward, but it's right around the corner.
So there you go. And Dr. Riley, what are you working on? Anything we need to know? What's interesting coming up for you?
So I'm on sabbatical from the university, but I just published my first book, Racial Attitudes in America Today. And I'm working on my second book, The Politics of Anti-Blackness in a Multiracial Democracy. And so in this work, I sort of I'm envisioning talking about the way in which anti-Black politics as an ideology has now infiltrated racial groups. Because as we talk a lot about white groups, but there are also the emergence of these negative racial stereotypes among people who look like us. And so what does this mean for our system? What does this mean for our politics? What does this mean for building successful coalitions with Asian and Hispanic communities, in particular when we see some of these same negative attitudes that are that we see similar to white attitudes that have existed in our political system. So these are just some of the things I'm working on as well.
Well, you got to love yourself first, don't you? Hey, everybody, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. We definitely appreciate Dr. Emmitt Riley from DePauw University in Indiana by way of Mississippi. Irv Joyner from North Carolina Central University School of Law, and Val Atkinson, who is the president of his porch, because he's retired now, and so he can sit out there and wave at people as they go by, like the old men do, and wave at everybody. Anyway, what I need for you to do is go out and do something good for somebody today. We're here a day early on Friday instead of on Saturday, so I'll give you your Saturday back. But you gotta got to tell your friends about it. Subscribe on any of the platforms that we talk about all the time. We'll be back here next Saturday for another edition of The Deal, and you guys go on and make it a good weekend. All right, bye.
Thank you.